Jax has quite a peculiar legacy in League's roster. He began as something of a joke character, not even intended to remain playable for any extended period of time, but his popularity was so great that he was eventually brought back into the game as a proper mainstay. More than that, Jax's significance in the lore has gradually increased with the passage of time. We've actually talked about him a fair bit before in a previous video, but I think a proper deep dive is in order. Released February 21st, 2009, Jax was introduced as the Grandmaster at Arms. His main gimmick as a character was that he could wield pretty much any weapon with lethal ability. No one knew Jax's actual past or even what species he was, though I do recall there being hints once upon a time that Jax might have been from Ionia. Whatever the case, Jax joined the League of Legends with seemingly no real allegiance to any one faction, allowing any summoner from any nation to capitalize on his skills. And capitalize they did. Jax proved to be such an effective fighter that he racked up the highest canonical win rate in League's history, and he became highly contested in just about every match. In fact, it even got to a point where his inclusion in the League had become rather controversial, as any team with Jax on it was believed to have a near guaranteed victory in the palm of their hand. Eventually, the higher-ups of the summoners had to seriously consider banning Jax altogether. Jax himself, though, had another idea. He proposed that if his skills were simply too great to actually handle, then he'd handicap himself by fighting with unconventional weapons. A lamppost, a fishing rod, and even a chicken's foot, to name a few. Though still a fierce combatant, the fact that Jax had to face his opponents with decidedly less lethal objects compared to his usual fare meant that his win rate did decline a bit, saving him from being exiled outright. Yes, Jax is the first champion that was canonically so OP that he had to be nerfed in-universe. It was quite an interesting premise for a character, to say the least, though not one that was ever intended to really last. Like I said before, he would be removed from the game for a time until eventually reinstated by popular demand. It was even stated by the summoners in universe that Jax's weapon ban could be lifted, but he ultimately refused and continued fighting with his bizarre collection of armaments. Allegedly. So, one of the first things to address about Jax is that despite what his bio said, the dude only actually had one of his handicap weapons in the game, the lamppost. The fishing rod, chicken's foot, and so on were featured in his ability icons, but the guy never actually used them in any match you could actually play with him. Jax's abilities included a leaping strike, a move where he spins his lamp overhead to evade incoming attacks somehow, igniting his lamp to deal extra damage, and a peculiar ability that temporarily buffed his stats for an ultimate. It was certainly a bizarre choice, making a character whose whole premise was the ability to fight with random junk, and then restricting players to using just one of them. Even still, Jax became quite a popular figure in the fandom. His cocky, cool guy attitude is probably the big reason why. His taunt, "Imagine if I had a real weapon," became something of a meme in the community. He also canonically inspired Earth to join the League, but, well, we all know how that went. Of course, if we're talking about Jax's influence on the community, then we do briefly have to address the Jaximus skin. The story goes that this alt skin was actually inspired by a terminally ill child who got to visit Riot HQ once upon a time, who claimed that Jax was his favorite champion. Riot created Jaximus based on an idea the kid pitched, and even gave the champion a voice line honoring him. "Here's to you, kid." A bit of a random aside, I know, but I feel like this is significant enough to the character's history that it was worth including. Anyways, back to the lore. When Riot's original reboot hit, Jax was put in a particularly precarious position compared to a lot of other characters. After all, his entire story revolved around being a champion in the Institute of War. So what could you even do with him when that organization was no longer around? Quite a lot, as it turns out. In the current canon, whatever that even means at this point, Jax was actually a survivor of Acacia, an ancient kingdom that was subjugated by the Sherman Empire and then subsequently destroyed by the Void. Jax, then known by his full name of Syjax Caelorynx Ikathun, was a member of the Kohari, an elite band of Icathian warriors that continued to resist Shurima's oppression even after multiple failed rebellions. In fact, Jax is allegedly the first mortal warrior in recorded history to have slain and ascended, even if he only managed to do so with an army at his back. Unfortunately, Shurima had plenty more ascended at its disposal. If it took nothing short of an army equipped with siege weapons and powerful magic to fell just one god warrior, you can imagine that Icathia's odds of beating even a handful of them were not exactly high. Thus, Icathian scholars dove deep into forbidden and esoteric arts in a desperate bid to match the might of the ascended host. In doing so, they stumbled across the Void and unwittingly turned the key for their own annihilation. Jax narrowly evaded the maelstrom of eldritch madness that consumed his homeland, though upon realizing that his entire nation and culture had been utterly wiped out, he prepared to end himself honorably. That is, until he stumbled across a lone brazier staff that was still somehow burning amidst the chaos. This magical lamp was nothing special, and yet the elemental magic igniting it seemed to keep the Void's encroaching madness at bay, if only slightly. Jax saw this as a sign, and took the lamp as a symbol of hope and rebellion. This last light of Icathia, as he called it, was proof that Jax's culture can endure even after multiple conquests and total eradication. Jax himself also wound up aging far slower, living for thousands of years after Icathia's downfall. Whether this is because of void exposure or somehow a side effect of the lamp, it's not entirely clear. Either way, Jax would use his newfound immortality to carry on the mission of preserving Icathia's memory, as well as combating the terror that destroyed it. He began seeking out allies that could stand with him if and when the day came when the Void threatened all of existence, hoping to rebuild the Kohari stronger than ever before. Unfortunately, the Kohari that Jax has built up in the time since are a bunch of random weirdos he's found all over Runeterra, whose only real notable factor is the ability to fight using improvised weapons. Pots and pans, fishing rods, wrenches, rakes. Look, I know this is supposed to be an homage to Jax's old lore, and I've even complained about this exact point in a previous video, but I'll say it again. Jax has had over 1,000 years to seek out allies and weapons capable of fending off the Void, something even gods and demigods struggle to keep at bay. And this is seriously the best fighting force he can muster? Like, I know Jax is fighting the Lovecraftian apocalypse with a lamppost, but at least it's a lamppost imbued with elemental magic. Also, wouldn't he outlive the majority of them anyways? Putting that rant aside, however, I do think this direction for Jax's story is a pretty interesting one all around. He's gone from a character who, at his inception, effectively didn't have a backstory to debatably one of the protagonists of Runeterra itself. What was originally just a random lamppost yanked out of the ground to prove a point has become a literal beacon shining against the all-consuming dark. Moreover, I love that at his core, there's nothing innately all that special about Jax. He's not a demigod or a spirit or whatever, and he doesn't have some particularly powerful or noteworthy weapon, even if it is slightly magical. At the end of the day, what sets Jax apart is that he's just that good. He's a warrior who's honed his skills to perfection after countless battles, enough to match an ascended in combat. Jax may say that he doesn't have a real weapon, but in reality, he wields the greatest weapon of all, an undying resolve.